The wedding night was full of light and laughter, the kind of evening that made everyone smile without even realizing it. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, soft golden light reflecting off every glass and plate. The scent of roses and candles filled the air, and the sound of gentle piano music floated through the room like a warm breeze. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, taking pictures, and enjoying every moment as the newlywed couple danced in the center of the hall. Among the staff working quietly in the background was a young woman named Emily. She wore the same black and white uniform as every other server, but there was something different about her, something calm and distant in her eyes. She moved gracefully between tables, carrying trays with drinks and plates with desserts. She smiled when people looked at her, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was polite, practiced, the kind of smile someone learns when they have to work among joy they can't really share. Emily had been working at this hotel for 6 months. She had served at dozens of weddings, birthdays, and fancy parties, but this one felt a little harder than usual. Maybe it was because of the live piano playing in the corner. The pianist's fingers danced over the keys, filling the air with a melody so beautiful that it seemed to make time slow down. Each note touched something inside Emily that she tried so hard to keep hidden. She found herself glancing toward the piano every few minutes, even when she was supposed to be focused on her work. It wasn't that she was being careless, but every time she heard the piano, her heart gave a small ache. She used to play once, long ago, before her life had changed. Before bills and responsibilities had replaced dreams, the piano had once been her whole world. It was how she spoke when she didn't have words, how she expressed joy, sadness, or love. Now, she only listened, and sometimes, in quiet moments, she imagined her fingers moving on invisible keys. She passed by the piano again, carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The pianist was playing a soft love song. Slow and romantic, Emily slowed down without realizing it, her steps falling in rhythm with the music. For a moment she forgot she was working. She imagined herself sitting there, her hands finding those familiar chords. The crowd lost in her melody. Then a guest called for another drink, and the dream broke like a soap bubble. She blinked, smiled, and hurried away. At one of the tables near the front sat Mr. Bennett, a well-dressed man in his late 50s with silver hair and kind but observant eyes. He had been watching the pianist too, though now his attention was on Emily. He noticed how her expression changed whenever she passed the piano, the way her eyes softened and her body seemed to lean slightly toward the sound. It wasn't the kind of look a person gave out of curiosity. It was longing, a quiet ache. He smiled to himself, wondering what her story might be. The night went on and laughter filled the hall. The bride and groom cut their cake, guests cheered, and the pianist played cheerful tunes to match the celebration. Emily continued working, clearing tables, serving plates, and refilling glasses. But no matter how busy she was, the music kept pulling her back. She didn't even notice when Mr. Bennett's eyes followed her again, thoughtful and curious. When Emily finally got a short break, she stood near the back of the room, watching the pianist's fingers move with such ease. Her eyes glistened softly in the dim light. A memory played in her mind. Her mother sitting in their small living room years ago, smiling as Emily practiced her scales. "You have magic in your hands," her mother used to say. "Don't ever stop playing." But life had a way of taking that magic away. One illness, one lost job, and everything changed. Emily sighed and looked away. Wiping a small tear before it could fall, she straightened her apron, ready to return to work. But just as she turned, the pianist ended his song and took a short break. The piano fell silent, leaving a strange emptiness in the air. Emily felt it instantly. The sudden quiet felt louder than any sound. She carried another tray past Mr. Bennett's table, and he decided to speak. "Excuse me, miss," he said kindly. She turned with a polite smile. "Yes, sir?" He nodded toward the piano. "You seem to like the music," he said. Emily hesitated, then nodded shyly. "Yes, it's beautiful." He studied her face. Noticing the flicker of emotion she tried to hide. "Do you play?" he asked gently. Her breath caught for a second. She looked down at her hands, the fingers she used now to carry trays instead of playing keys. "I used to," she said softly, "a long time ago." Then she quickly added, "But not anymore," and smiled politely. Trying to end the conversation, Mr. Bennett didn't press further, but his eyes stayed thoughtful as Emily walked away. She felt her heart beating a little faster. Why had she even admitted that? She hadn't talked about her piano days in years. She tried to shake off the feeling and focus on her job, but something inside her had shifted. A small part of her that had been sleeping for years was now awake again. The pianist returned to play another cheerful tune, and the guests began dancing again. But Emily's thoughts were far away. She didn't know it yet. But this night, this wedding that was going to change her life. In the laughter, the music, and the clinking glasses, a quiet story was beginning. One that would surprise everyone, even her. The night was moving fast. The wedding celebration was at its liveliest. Guests were laughing, music filled the air, and the dance floor was alive with spinning dresses and happy faces. The air smelled of roses, wine, and sweet desserts. But in the middle of all that joy, one man's attention was somewhere else. Mr. Bennet sat quietly at his table, watching everything around him with a gentle smile. He wasn't like the other guests who danced and drank loudly. He was calm, thoughtful, the kind of man who liked to notice the small things that others ignored. He had come to the wedding as a family friend of the groom. But what caught his attention that night wasn't the bride or the decorations. It was one of the servers, the young woman named Emily. He had noticed her earlier, moving gracefully between tables, serving drinks and food with quiet politeness. There was something about her that made her stand out. She didn't look like someone who truly belonged in a hotel uniform. Her face was soft, her eyes deep, and there was a strange calmness in her movements. It wasn't beauty that caught his attention. It was sadness. A kind of hidden story behind her gentle smile. Each time she passed near the piano, Mr. Bennet saw a change in her face. Her steps slowed. Her eyes followed the pianist's hands, and her lips moved slightly, as if remembering something. He could tell that she wasn't just listening to the music. She was feeling it, as though every note spoke to her heart. It was the look of someone who once knew the music deeply. He leaned back in his chair and watched her carefully, wondering who she was. The pianist, a professional hired for the event, played with confidence and showmanship. But when Mr. Bennet looked at Emily, he felt that she understood the piano in a different way, not as a job, but as a language of emotion. After a while, the music stopped for a short break. The crowd clapped politely, and the pianist stood up to take a drink of water. The room filled with chatter again. Mr. Bennet looked around, but his eyes found Emily once more. She was standing near the back wall, her tray empty, her eyes fixed on the piano. There was something almost painful about the way she looked at it, as if she missed something she once loved deeply. Mr. Bennet decided he couldn't ignore his curiosity. He raised his hand slightly and caught her attention. Emily noticed and walked over quickly, her polite smile returning. "Yes, sir," she said softly. Her voice was calm, respectful but also shy. Mr. Bennet smiled kindly. "You seem to enjoy the music," he said. She hesitated, not expecting the question.
"Yes," she replied quietly.
"It's very beautiful," he nodded. "Do you play?" For a moment, Emily froze. Her smile faded slightly, and her eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't know why his question hit her so suddenly. It was simple, harmless, yet it opened a door she had locked years ago. After a small pause, she said softly, "I used to." Mr. Bennet tilted his head. "Used to?" he asked gently. She nodded. "When I was younger," she said. "But that was a long time ago. I don't play anymore." She smiled politely again, as if trying to close the subject, and looked away nervously. He could see the truth in her eyes, the kind of truth people hide when they've lost something important. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, so he simply nodded. "That's a shame," he said kindly. "You look like someone who has music in her heart." Emily didn't reply. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Maybe once," she whispered, and excused herself, returning to work. But as she walked away, her thoughts were racing. She hadn't told anyone about her past in years, not even her coworkers. And now, in the middle of a busy wedding, a stranger had seen right through her. She tried to focus on her work, but Mr. Bennet's words stayed in her mind. Music in her heart, he had said. She wondered if that part of her was still there, or if it had truly disappeared. As the night continued, she found herself glancing toward him more than once, wondering if he was still watching her. He didn't seem judgmental or curious in a bad way. There was kindness in his eyes, the kind that made people feel seen, not exposed. Mr. Bennet, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about her. He was a man who believed that some people carried hidden talents the world never noticed, and he felt sure Emily was one of them. her posture, her quietness. Even the sadness in her eyes told him that she wasn't meant to just serve food and clear plates. He had a feeling she had once lived a very different kind of life. At one point during the evening, the pianist returned and began to play again. The song was fast and joyful, but Emily's face softened into something bittersweet. She moved to the rhythm as she worked, her steps light, her body naturally swaying with the melody. It was so subtle that most people didn't notice, but Mr. Bennet did. He smiled to himself, his curiosity turning into a quiet plan. He didn't know what he would do exactly, but he wanted to see what would happen if Emily ever touched those piano keys again. Something told him it would be special, something unforgettable. The rest of the evening passed like a dream. Emily kept serving, smiling, and moving among the guests, but her mind was far away. Every note of the piano called out to her, reminding her of who she used to be. Her hands itched to play. Her heart ached to feel those keys again, but she told herself it was impossible. That part of her life was gone forever. Still, Mr. Bennet's gentle question had planted a seed. She didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, that seed would grow into a moment that would change everything, and somewhere inside her, under the layers of responsibility and silence, the music she had buried long ago began to stir once more, waiting for a chance to be heard again. The wedding reception was now at its happiest moment. The dance floor was full, children were laughing, and the bride and groom were surrounded by smiling guests. The music filled the room like warm sunlight, soft piano tunes blending with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Everyone was enjoying themselves, no one noticing how one small decision was about to change the night completely. The pianist had been playing for hours, his fingers dancing smoothly across the keys, but finally, he took a deep breath and stood up to take a short break. He wiped his forehead and walked toward the back of the hall, leaving the grand piano sitting silently under the glowing lights. The sudden silence felt strange. Guests looked around for a moment, some tapping their feet as if waiting for the next song. At one of the front tables sat Mr. Bennet, the man who had been quietly observing everything all evening. He noticed Emily standing near the dessert table, holding a tray. Her eyes were once again drawn toward the piano. It was the same look he had seen before, longing mixed with fear, like someone watching a dream they could never touch. Mr. Bennet leaned back in his chair, a small smile curling on his lips. He had an idea, something sudden but exciting. He looked around and realized the pianist was gone. The room was lively, the guests were happy, and a playful thought crossed his mind. What if he could make something unexpected happen? Something everyone would remember? He raised his glass slightly and spoke loud enough for the tables around him to hear. "It's such a shame the music stopped," he said with a cheerful tone. Some guests turned toward him and laughed, agreeing. "Yes, we need more music." One woman said, "We can't stop dancing now." That was exactly the moment Mr. Bennet had been waiting for. He pointed gently toward Emily, who was just walking past. "Maybe she can play," he said with a kind smile. His voice carried far enough that several people nearby heard him. Emily froze instantly. The tray in her hand almost slipped. She blinked. Unsure if she heard correctly. "Me?" she whispered softly. But by then others had already turned to look. The idea spread through the tables like a spark. "The server can play?" someone said curiously. Another guest laughed lightly. "Really? That would be interesting." The bride's younger brother clapped his hands excitedly. "Yes, let her try." Emily felt her face flush, her heart pounding in her chest. "Oh no. I can't," she stammered. Shaking her head, she looked at Mr. Bennet, her eyes wide with panic. "Please don't," she whispered, but it was too late. People were already whispering, smiling, and turning in their seats to see what was happening. The pianist wasn't around, and everyone seemed eager for a small surprise. The bride and groom looked curious, too. The bride laughed softly. "Oh, can she really play?" she asked in amusement. Emily's manager, who had been standing near the bar, stepped forward nervously. He looked at Emily and then at the excited guests. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. It wasn't usual to let a server touch the piano, especially in front of all the guests. But seeing the crowd's energy and the smiles around the room, he finally nodded hesitantly. "Just for a moment," he said quietly. "Make it quick." Emily's throat went dry. She felt like every eye in the room was on her. Her legs felt weak and her hands trembled slightly. She wanted to run away, to hide in the kitchen, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe a quiet voice inside her saying this moment mattered. As she slowly walked toward the piano, the whispers grew louder. Some people smiled encouragingly. Others watched with playful doubt. "This should be interesting," someone murmured. "Can she really play?" Another said. Emily reached the grand piano, her reflection shining faintly on the polished black surface. It had been years since she had touched real keys. Her heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. She looked down at her shaking hands, then glanced around. Mr. Bennett met her eyes from his seat. His expression was warm and reassuring. He nodded gently as if to say, "You can do this." That one small gesture gave her strength. She sat down slowly, the soft cushioned bench creaking slightly under her weight. The entire room seemed to fall into silence. The lights above sparkled softly, the air thick with expectation. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers hovering above the keys. The first few seconds felt endless. She could hear her own heartbeat, her mind screaming at her to stop. But then something inside her shifted. A memory flickered, and her mother's voice sang, "Play like you're telling a story." Emily pressed one key, a gentle note echoing across the room. The sound was soft, trembling, but clear. Then another note followed, then another. Each key woke something inside her, and before she knew it, her fingers began to move faster. The crowd watched in silence, their smiles fading into awe. The shy server who had looked so unsure moments ago was now playing with emotion and skill that no one expected. Her music was gentle but powerful. Sad yet beautiful. For Emily, the world disappeared. She wasn't in a hotel anymore. She wasn't a server surrounded by strangers. She was that young girl again, sitting at her old piano, pouring her heart into the keys. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, her nerves were gone, her hands flowed naturally, gracefully, like the music had never left her. The guests forgot their chatter, their drinks, their laughter. Every sound in the room disappeared except for the melody she created. And somewhere in the back, Mr. Bennett smiled to himself. His little idea had turned into something magical. He had seen the spark in her. And now, everyone else could see it too. When the final note echoed and faded, the room stayed silent for one long second, then suddenly applause erupted. Loud and sincere, people stood up, clapping and cheering. Even the bride had tears in her eyes. Emily sat there stunned, her hands still resting on the keys. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She looked around, her face red but glowing with a light that hadn't been there before. She had come to the wedding as a server, invisible and ordinary. But in that one unexpected moment, she had become something else, the heart of the entire night. And deep inside, she knew something in her life had just changed forever. For a few seconds, Emily could not move. She sat there at the piano, her heart beating so loudly that she could almost hear it. Dozens of eyes were staring at her, and she felt her face turn red. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't supposed to be in the spotlight. She was just a server, a background figure, someone meant to blend in and not be noticed. The ballroom, which had been full of laughter a moment ago, was now quiet. Guests leaned forward in curiosity, some smiling playfully, others whispering to each other. "Is she really going to play?" one woman murmured. "This should be fun," another whispered with a giggle. A few of them even raised their phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Emily glanced toward her manager, hoping he would stop this, but instead he gave her a small nod. It wasn't exactly approval, more like nervous permission. He looked unsure but said quietly, "Go ahead, just for a moment. It'll make the guests happy." Her hands felt cold, her fingers stiff. Her stomach twisted in knots as she took a slow breath. She had never felt so out of place before. She wasn't dressed like a pianist. She didn't belong behind a grand piano, not in her black uniform and white apron. She belonged among the staff, behind the tables, not at the center of attention. The whispers grew louder. "Come on, let her try," someone said with excitement. The bride and groom exchanged curious smiles. Even they seemed amused by the sudden twist. "It's just for fun," the bride said sweetly. "Let's see what she can do." Emily's heart was pounding now. Her legs felt heavy, but somehow, she made herself walk toward the piano. Each step echoed in her ears. The crowd's chatter faded into a dull hum. Her world narrowed down to the few feet between her and the piano. When she reached it, she stopped and looked at her reflection on its shiny black surface. The lights above made her eyes glisten. She could see her trembling hands, her nervous smile, and the fear behind it. For a moment she thought about turning around and walking away. But then she saw Mr. Bennet sitting near the front, watching her with that same calm, kind expression. He nodded at her again, a gentle encouragement that said without words,
"You can do this." She took a deep breath and sat down slowly.
The bench creaked under her, and the room went completely silent. Even the clinking of glasses and laughter from the far tables stopped. All she could hear was her heartbeat and the faint hum of the lights above. She looked down at the keys, her fingers hovering just above them. Her mind went blank. She didn't know what to play. She hadn't practiced in years, and now all these strangers were watching her. Someone near the back laughed softly, not in a cruel way, but in disbelief. Maybe she forgot how, they joked quietly. A few others chuckled. The sound hit Emily like a small sting. Her cheeks grew warmer. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering her mother's voice. "When you play, don't think about who's listening," her mother used to say.
"Just close your eyes and let your heart speak." She exhaled slowly,
And her fingers gently pressed one key. The soft note echoed in the silence, simple, quiet, and pure. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hush the whispers. Her fingers found another note and another, slowly forming a melody she hadn't played in years. It was shaky at first, like a fragile memory being brought back to life. But with every passing second, her hands grew steadier. The muscle memory returned. Her heart remembered what her mind had forgotten. The song she chose was one she had written herself long ago, back when her life was filled with hope and dreams. As the melody filled the room, something changed. The laughter stopped completely. The guests, who had expected something amusing, now sat frozen in surprise. The soft notes carried emotion, sadness, beauty, and something almost magical. Emily's head bowed slightly as she played. Her eyes closed, lost in the music. Her body relaxed, and her fingers began to move faster, dancing gracefully across the keys. The melody swelled, growing more emotional. Each note seemed to tell a story, of loss, of love, of dreams buried and found again. In that moment, Emily wasn't a server anymore. She wasn't the girl in a uniform. She was a musician, pure and true, playing straight from her soul. The guests began to feel it too. Their smiles faded into awe. One woman placed a hand on her chest, her eyes filling with tears. The bride leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "She's incredible." He nodded silently, unable to look away. Even the staff, who had seen Emily as just another coworker, stood near the edges of the room, their mouths slightly open in disbelief. They had never heard her speak much, let alone play something so beautiful. The music wrapped around the room like a warm blanket, soft yet powerful. It felt like the sound itself carried a story. Every note was alive, full of emotion. When the last few notes began to fade, Emily slowly lifted her hands, letting the sound linger in the air. The silence that followed was deep and perfect. No one even breathed for a moment. Then, all at once, the room exploded in applause. People stood up, clapping loudly. Some whistled, others cheered. A few had tears in their eyes. Mr. Bennet clapped too, smiling proudly. The entire ballroom seemed to glow with energy. Emily sat there for a few seconds, stunned. Her hands were still trembling. She hadn't expected that. She had only wanted to survive the moment. But instead, she had moved an entire room. As she stood up slowly, the bride walked over, eyes shining. "That was beautiful," she said warmly. "You're amazing." Emily smiled shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." She walked away quietly. Her heart still racing, she felt lighter, freer, as if something heavy had finally lifted from her chest. She didn't know what would come next, but deep down, she knew one thing. She had just stepped back into the world she thought she'd lost forever. The whole ballroom had gone completely silent. Not a single sound could be heard. The clinking of glasses, the chatter, even the laughter that had filled the room a few minutes ago had disappeared. Everyone's attention was now on Emily, the young server sitting at the grand piano. Her hands were trembling, her heart beating so fast it felt like it might break through her chest. She stared at the keys, her mind blank. The piano looked huge in front of her, its shiny black surface reflecting her nervous face. She took a slow breath, her fingers hovering above the ivory keys. For a second, she thought she wouldn't be able to do it. Maybe she should just stand up, smile awkwardly, and walk away. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in front of all these people. Not like this. But then she heard a small voice in her head. It was her mother's voice, warm and gentle. whispering from somewhere deep inside her memory. "Play, my girl. Play from your heart." Something inside her softened, and before she even realized it, her fingers pressed a single key. The sound was soft and clear, floating gently across the room. It hung in the air like a fragile bubble, making everyone hold their breath. Then she pressed another key and another. The notes came slowly at first, uncertain and shaky, like a child learning to walk again after a long time. But each sound woke up a memory. Each note reminded her of who she used to be. She remembered sitting in her tiny living room years ago, her mother beside her, smiling proudly as she practiced scales. She remembered the feeling of getting lost in the music, how time used to disappear when she played. Her hands began to move more freely. The stiffness melted away and the rhythm started to flow. The melody she chose wasn't written on paper. It was something she carried in her heart, a song she had composed herself long ago. It was filled with emotion, a mix of sadness and hope, pain and peace. The people in the room watched in awe. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire world had paused to listen. The shy server who had walked around quietly all night now looked completely different. There was light in her eyes and her fingers moved with confidence. The notes danced softly through the air, each one carrying a feeling. The song was slow and full of emotion, touching something deep inside everyone who listened. The melody seemed to tell a story of someone who had lost everything and was slowly finding it again. The bride, standing near the center of the room, held her husband's hand tightly. Her eyes glistened with tears. "She's amazing," she whispered. The groom nodded silently, unable to take his eyes off the piano. Even the hotel staff had stopped working. The waiters stood at the sides of the room, watching in disbelief. They had known Emily for months, but none of them had ever seen her like this. To them, she had always been quiet, kind, hardworking, but ordinary. Now they saw someone completely different. Someone shining, someone alive. The music filled every corner of the room. It wrapped around people's hearts. It wasn't just a performance, it was a confession. Emily wasn't playing for fame or applause, she was playing for herself. For the little girl who once dreamed of becoming a pianist, for the mother who had always believed in her. Her eyes were closed now, her head slightly tilted forward as she played. Her whole body moved gently with the rhythm. Her fingers glided effortlessly across the keys. It was as if the piano was part of her. Each note blended into the next, smooth and perfect, somewhere near the front. Mr. Bennett watched with quiet pride. His guess had been right. He had seen something in her that no one else had noticed. And now the entire room could see it too. As the song built up, the melody grew stronger, deeper. It spoke without words and about struggle, love, loss, and hope. Every person in that ballroom felt it differently. Some thought of someone they missed. Some thought of dreams they had let go of. But for a few minutes, they were all connected through her music. When Emily reached the final part of her song, her fingers slowed. The notes softened again, becoming gentle whispers. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint ticking of a nearby clock. The last note lingered in the air, trembling like a sigh, and then faded into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Emily's hands rested on the keys. Her head bowed, her chest rose and fell slowly. Her heart still racing, she didn't dare look up. She didn't know what to expect. Laughter, applause, or awkward silence. Then someone started clapping. It was Mr. Bennett, his face glowing with pride. Soon another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping loudly, cheering. Some even whistled. The sound filled the room like thunder. Emily lifted her head, her eyes wide in surprise. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. People were smiling at her, some wiping away tears. The bride and groom were standing, applauding with the rest. The bride even shouted softly. That was beautiful. Emily felt something warm rise in her chest, a mix of joy and disbelief. She had never felt so seen before. Her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from pure emotion. She stood slowly and gave a small, shy smile. A few people came closer, wanting to talk to her. But she couldn't speak, she could only nod, tears glimmering in her eyes. The applause went on for almost a full minute. When it finally faded, the room felt different, softer, warmer. Full of quiet admiration, Emily stepped away from the piano, her body light, her soul even lighter. As she walked back toward the staff area, Her manager met her with an amazed look. "I had no idea you could play like that," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "Neither did I," she whispered. That night, as she continued serving quietly, something inside her had changed. The piano had reminded her of who she really was, and though she didn't know it yet, that single song was about to open a new door in her life, a door she thought had closed forever. The sound of Emily's music filled the ballroom like warm light. It wrapped around everyone, soft but powerful. The air itself seemed to change, that it felt calm, emotional, alive. The laughter and noise that had filled the place earlier had vanished, replaced by a deep silence where only her melody spoke. Each note she played touched something hidden inside the hearts of the people listening. Emily had completely forgotten where she was. She didn't see the chandeliers or the crowd anymore. She didn't even notice the expensive tables or the camera phones recording her. In her mind, there was only the piano and the music flowing through her fingers. It felt like coming home after being lost for a long time. Her heart poured out through the keys, all her pain, her memories, her hope, everything she had kept buried for years. Her fingers moved faster now, not from nervousness but from passion. The melody grew richer, the emotions stronger, sometimes soft and tender, sometimes powerful and stormy. It was like she was telling a story without words, a story about a girl who once had dreams, who lost them, and who had just found them again. The guests could feel it. Some had their eyes closed, lost in the beauty of the sound. Some held hands quietly. Others wiped away tears they didn't expect to shed. The bride leaned against her husband's shoulder, whispering, "I've never heard anything like this." He nodded silently, completely moved. Even the waiters at the back of the room stopped working. They stood quietly, watching their coworker in amazement. They had seen her every day, tired, quiet, polite, but never like this. She looked different now. She wasn't Emily the server. She was Emily the artist. The music transformed her. It made her glow. Her face was calm but full of emotion, her eyes half closed as she played with everything she had. Each note spread through the hall like magic. The chandelier lights seemed to shimmer brighter. The air seemed thicker with emotion. The guests who had come expecting food, laughter, and dancing were now experiencing something else, something they would never forget. When Emily reached the middle of her song, the energy changed again. The notes slowed down, becoming softer, sadder. It felt like a heart remembering pain. The melody told of lost time, of things that could never be regained. Some people in the crowd bowed their heads, feeling the weight of it. Mr. Bennett sat near the front, his eyes glistening. He had felt it from the start, that this young woman had something special inside her, something she had hidden from the world. Now, as he watched her play, he felt proud and deeply moved. He knew that what was happening wasn't just music. It was a moment of truth as the music continued. Emily's memories began to blend with the notes. She saw flashes in her mind. Her mother sitting beside her, the smell of old sheet music, the laughter in their small home before everything changed. She remembered the day her mother became sick, how she had stopped playing because the piano reminded her too much of what she lost. She had promised herself she would never play again. It hurt too much, but now, here she was, years later, playing again. And for the first time, it didn't hurt, it healed. Each note felt like stitching a broken part of her heart back together. She realized that her mother's words were still true. "You have magic in your hands," she used to say. Emily finally believed it again. The crowd didn't just hear her music, they felt her story. They didn't know what she had gone through, but they could sense it in every note. It was as if her pain had turned into something beautiful that she shared with them. Then the song began to rise again. The quiet sadness turned into strength. The rhythm grew faster, fuller, brighter. It was like watching the sunrise after a long night. The audience sat spellbound, afraid to even move. Emily's fingers danced across the piano, light as feathers yet full of emotion. The sound grew and filled every corner of the ballroom. Every person there felt that they were part of something rare and real. And just as suddenly as it began, the music started to slow. Her fingers softened. The melody turned gentle again, like a whisper. It was the kind of softness that came after tears, peaceful and pure. When the final note left the piano, it hung in the air for a long, beautiful moment before fading away. The silence that followed was heavy, not empty, but full of feeling. Nobody spoke, nobody even breathed. They just sat there, letting the last note settle into their hearts. Then, like a spark breaking the silence, someone clapped. Then another person, and another. Within seconds, the whole room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was real. Thunderous, emotional. People stood up, cheering. Some shouted, "Bravo!" Others whistled and smiled through tears. Emily sat frozen, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe it. Her hands were still on the keys, trembling for a moment. She wondered if she was dreaming. But the applause was real, the smiles were real. The emotion in the air was real. The bride walked up to her, tears running down her cheeks. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said softly. Emily stood slowly, her knees weak. She could barely speak, her voice came out as a whisper. "Thank you." Mr. Bennett came forward too, his face glowing with pride. "I told you," he said warmly. "You have music in your heart." Emily smiled, this time a true, open smile, the kind she hadn't shown in years. Around her, people were still clapping, still smiling, still in awe of what they had just witnessed. And Emily, standing beside the grand piano, felt something deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was happiness, pure and powerful. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a server blending into the background. She felt seen, alive, and free. Her music had reached people's hearts, and in doing so, it had healed her own. That night, in that shining ballroom filled with love and light, Emily found herself again not as a server, not as someone forgotten by life, but as a woman who could still touch the world with her music. And as the guests cheered and the applause echoed, she knew deep in her heart that this was only the beginning. The wedding reception was slowly coming to an end. The music had stopped, but the memory of Emily's song still floated in the air like perfume. Guests were still talking about it at their tables, their voices full of wonder. Who would have thought she could play like that? One woman said, "It was like listening to something from the heart." Another replied. The bride and groom kept smiling, still amazed. And a few guests even came up to Emily to thank her personally. She smiled politely, her cheeks still red, her hands still trembling from all the attention. For Emily, everything felt unreal. Just an hour ago, she was serving drinks unnoticed and ordinary. Now people were looking at her with admiration and respect. Some called her the piano girl, while others simply said, "You made this night unforgettable." She didn't know what to say, so she only kept smiling shyly. Nodding her head, her heart felt warm, but her mind was spinning. As she stood near the back of the room, watching people leave, she suddenly saw Mr. Bennett walking toward her. His kind smile hadn't faded, and his eyes still carried that same gentle curiosity he had shown earlier in the evening. "There you are," he said warmly. "I was hoping to find you before I left." Emily straightened nervously. "Oh, hello, sir," she said softly. "I hope I didn't do anything wrong," Mr. Bennett laughed kindly. "Wrong? My dear, you just gave everyone here a memory they'll never forget." She looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to make such a scene," she whispered. I don't even know what came over me." He shook his head. "It wasn't a scene," he said. "It was something beautiful. You played with such emotion. I could feel it, everyone could. That kind of talent doesn't come from practice alone. It comes from living, from feeling, from loss." Emily's eyes widened slightly at his words. It was as if he had read her heart. She hesitated for a moment, then finally said quietly, "I used to play. Before my mother got sick," she paused, her voice trembling slightly. "She was the one who taught me. She always said I had music in my hands." Mr. Bennett listened carefully, his expression soft and respectful. "She sounds like a wonderful woman," he said gently. Emily nodded. She was. She loved music even more than I did. When she got sick, I had to take care of her. We couldn't afford lessons anymore, and after she passed away, I stopped playing." Her voice broke for a second, and she took a deep breath. "It hurt too much, you know. Every note reminded me of her, so I just walked away from it." The older man's eyes glistened with emotion. "I understand," he said quietly. "Sometimes the things we love most are the hardest to face again." Emily nodded slowly, wiping a small tear from the corner of her eye. "I thought I'd forgotten how to play," she said softly. "But when I touched those keys tonight, it was like she was there again, guiding my hands." There was silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavy but comforting. The guests around them were starting to leave, but it was as if time had slowed for the two of them. Mr. Bennett finally spoke again. "Do you know what you played tonight?" he asked. She smiled faintly. It was a song I wrote years ago. Didn't even have a name. I just called it For Her. It was the last thing I ever played for my mother. Mr. Bennett's voice softened even more. Then tonight wasn't just music, it was love, it was memory. It was healing. Emily looked at him, her eyes wet, and whispered, "Maybe it was." He smiled. "You have a gift, Emily. A rare one, you shouldn't hide it anymore." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's too late for that. I'm just a server now," but he didn't agree. "No," he said firmly. "It's never too late to return to who you truly are. Sometimes life pushes us away from our dreams, but it doesn't erase them, they wait inside us. Until something or someone brings them back to life." His words hit her deeply. She didn't know what to say. For years she had carried guilt and sadness for giving up music. For the first time she felt like maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still a piece of that old dream left inside her. Mr. Bennett reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. "Here," he said. "I have a friend who runs a local music school. He's always looking for passionate pianists, people who play with heart. Give him a call, tell him I sent you." Emily stared at the card, unable to speak. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. He smiled. "Completely serious. The world needs to hear you play again." Tears filled her eyes and she shook her head in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered. He chuckled softly. "Just promise me one thing, don't stop playing again." She nodded slowly, clutching the card to her chest like it was something precious. "I promise," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. They stood there for a moment, smiling at each other, before Mr. Bennett gently patted her shoulder and said, "Good night, Emily. You made this night unforgettable." Then he walked away. Disappearing into the crowd of departing guests, Emily stood there long after he left. Holding the card tightly, she looked back at the piano, still shining under the soft lights. The memory of her music replayed in her mind. The melody, the emotion, the faces of the people who listened. For the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She didn't feel like just a worker blending into the background. She felt alive again. She felt like the person she used to be, the girl her mother had believed in that night. When she finally took off her apron and stepped out into the cool night air, she looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, twinkling like tiny lights above her. She smiled softly and whispered, "I played for you tonight, Mom." And in her heart, she felt it, a quiet warmth, a silent answer, as if her mother was smiling back. Somewhere deep inside her, a dream that had been silent for years began to breathe again, waiting for the next chapter to begin. The night after the wedding, Emily could hardly sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the piano. The melody played again and again in her mind. Soft and beautiful, it didn't feel real, and the applause, the smiles, the way people looked at her, it all felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. When morning came, sunlight streamed through her small apartment window, lighting up her old piano sitting quietly in the corner. It was covered with dust and old music sheets. Untouched for years, she walked over slowly, her heart full, and ran her fingers across the keys. They felt cold but familiar. She smiled softly, whispering, "I'm sorry I left you for so long." Then, for the first time in years, she began to play. At first, the notes came out uneven and shy, but soon the sound filled the little room. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and this time she didn't cry. She just played, for herself, for her mother, for the joy she thought she had lost forever. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from the hotel manager. "Emily, you won't believe this," he wrote. "Someone from the wedding posted a video of your performance online. It's going viral, thousands of views already. People are calling you the wedding pianist." Emily stared at the screen, her mouth open in disbelief. She quickly searched for the video, and there it was, a clip of her sitting at the piano in her server's uniform, playing her heart out. The title read, "When the Waitress Sat at the Piano." Everyone went silent. The comments were filled with amazement. "She plays with such emotion," one person wrote. "You can feel her soul in the music," said another. "Who is she? Someone give her a record deal," another comment said. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't believe people were touched by her music. For so long she had felt invisible, but now, strangers from all over were listening. She sat there for a long time, reading the comments and smiling through her tears. By the next morning, the video had over 1 million views. News pages were sharing it, calling it the most beautiful moment at a wedding you'll ever see. Reporters began contacting the hotel, asking about her. The hotel manager called her again, sounding more excited than ever. "Emily, everyone wants to know who you are," he said. "They're calling the hotel nonstop. You need to come in." She went that afternoon, nervous but smiling. The staff greeted her with hugs and cheers. "Our star is here," one of the waiters joked. The manager grinned and said, "We've had guests calling just to ask if you'll be playing again." Emily laughed shyly, not knowing how to react. Just then, a reporter approached her in the lobby. "You're the piano girl, right?" he asked. "Your video has moved millions of people. Can we interview you?" She hesitated but agreed during the interview. They asked about her story and she spoke honestly. She told them about her mother, about leaving her dreams behind, and how that night changed everything. When the interview was posted online, the response was overwhelming. People started sending her messages of encouragement. Some offered help. Others shared how her story had inspired them to follow their own dreams again. And then one message stood out. It was from the music school Mr. Bennett had mentioned. The director wrote, "We saw your performance and your story touched us deeply. We would love to offer you a scholarship to study with us. You have something very special, Emily. We'd be honored to have you." She couldn't believe it. Her hands shook as she read the message again and again. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," remembering his kind eyes and the hope he had given her. That evening, she walked back into the hotel ballroom, the same place where everything had changed. The manager smiled at her. "You know," he said, "we've decided something. We want you to be the hotel's official pianist. Not as a server, as a musician." Emily's eyes widened. She couldn't speak for a few seconds. "Me?" she asked softly. "You mean, really?" He nodded. "You've earned it, Emily. You made this place shine that night. It's time everyone hears you again." And so, from that day on, Emily's life took a new turn. No longer did she carry trays or wear a server's apron. She sat behind the grand piano every evening. Her name printed on a small golden plate beside it, Emily Grace, resident pianist. People came to the hotel not just for dinner or weddings anymore. They came to hear her play. Some would whisper, "That's her, the girl from the video," while others simply sat in silence, letting her music wash over them. Emily never played for fame or money. She played because it made her feel alive, because every time she pressed those keys, she could feel her mother's presence beside her, smiling proudly. Sometimes, when she finished playing late at night and the guests were gone, she would sit alone by the piano, close her eyes and whisper, "We did it. Mom." The viral fame continued for weeks, and invitations came from other cities and music halls. But Emily never forgot where it began. One wedding night. One act of courage and one man's belief in her. She continued to work hard, taking lessons again at the music school, balancing her job and her studies. Slowly her confidence grew, her fingers became stronger, her heart lighter, and every time she played, she remembered that moment when she sat trembling in front of a crowd, afraid and unsure, and how one song changed everything. That night had given her back more than a dream. It had given her purpose. Years later, when people asked her how it all started, she would smile and say softly, "It began at a wedding, when someone believed in me, and deep down, she always knew that the true miracle wasn't that she played at that wedding. It was that she found the courage to play again." Her story became a reminder to everyone who heard it, that no matter how far you drift from your dreams, they never really leave you. They wait quietly, just like her piano had, waiting for the day you finally come back and let them sing again.